Imagine running side by side with a tiger you once saved in the state of being a helpless cub years after you released it back into the wild. That's an incredible reunion you won't believe as we continue with the emotional attachment between a man and one of the most majestic creatures on Earth. Hit that like and subscribe and make sure that you stick around and see how it unfolds. For David, an avid explorer and nature and wildlife enthusiast, it was just another day. He always dreamed of escaping to the dense jungles of Southeast Asia, and with much of his life, he spent his days trekking the untamed landscapes, all in the hope that he could catch a glimpse of what many considered rare animals in their native homes. The forest was his second home, and in it, he forgot the rest of the world and lost himself in peace. But that day it was different. The hum of the jungle in this case, the chirping of birds, rustling of leaves, and in the distance, calls by monkeys, usually breaks with the sound that does not belong. It was a faint, pitiful cry that gave him goosebumps. David stopped in his tracks, straining to hear. He heard it again, this time a desperate whimper that meant only one thing. An animal was in trouble. David followed the sound, pushing through thick vines and tangles of brush. His heart was pounding as cries grew louder, leading him into the depths of the jungle. He finally entered a small clearing, and there, caught in the cruel snare of a poacher, he saw a tiny tiger cub. She couldn't have been more than 2 weeks old. It was small, with bright orange and black fur matted with dirt. Its eyes were wide with fear and agony. The trap had cut into its leg, and it whimpered in agony, unable to free itself. David's heart sank at this view. He knew better than to interfere with wild animals, particularly tigers, but he couldn't just walk away and let the cub die. Slowly, David advanced closer to the cub, talking softly to it while trying to soothe the frightened creature. He certainly knew that even cub tigers were not to be messed around with. The wee one let out a weak growl, trying to hold its ground while it was appallingly too weak to fight any longer. David crouched down, taking a closer look at the snare wrapped around its leg. The wire was tightly bound into its flesh, and the cub was losing strength fast. With shaking hands slowly unfurling the snare, David's heart pounded as the cub whimpered in pain. This was a delicate operation. One wrong move, and the wire may cause them more harm. But then, after some tense minutes, David freed the cub. It didn't run away, though. Instead, it collapsed, too exhausted and injured to move. David's thoughts raced. The cub wouldn't survive till dawn without help. Despite knowing tigers belonged in the jungle, he couldn't leave it to die. Wrapping the cub in his jacket, he cautiously walked through the jungle, speaking softly to calm its fear. Back in the camp, David was hard at work nursing the cub back to health. He fabricated a splint for its injured leg and prepared a special formula for feeding him. Day and night, hour after hour, he sat beside the cub, offering comfort as the little creature slowly began to recover. With the passing of the weeks, the connection between David and the tiger cub grew stronger. He gave her the name Suri, a pretty apt name for the little fighter that she was. Day by day, Suri was growing stronger. The grumpy child developed a playful touch with a happy growl as she trailed around the camp, pouncing on leaves and insects like a little ball of fire meant to create heat. David was very attached to Suri, but in due course realized that he would have to let her go in the end, since tigers are wild animals and belong in the jungle, not with humans. The toughest decision he ever made was one day when he had to set Suri free and continue driving her to the border of the forest where she belonged. Suri hesitated, looking up at David with enormous eyes, as if feeling that this was goodbye. David knelt and stroked her silky fur one last time before whispering, "Go on, girl. This is where you are meant to be." With one last nuzzle, Suri turned and disappeared into the trees, leaving David standing there as the tiger cub that had been rescued by him returned to the wild. Leaving didn't get any easier to say goodbye, but David felt that it was the right thing to do. He had given Suri a new lease on life, and now she could live her life to the fullest, being free, wild, and untamed. Still, though, he couldn't shake the image of the tiny cub from his mind, often wondering if Suri survived and grew into the fearsome predator she was born to be. 5 years later, David remained in the jungle, carrying on his adventures. He could even have become accustomed to the fact that he'd never again see Suri. Sometimes, though, in the course of life, things turn out differently, and surprises are in store. David was trekking one day through the very same jungle where he had rescued Suri. The air seemed still, unnatural, quiet, and strangely impenetrable. Faded sounds of the jungle had receded into silence, and an eerie quiet seemed to make the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He stopped dead in his tracks and looked around through the dense foliage. Something was watching him. Then, through a thick underbrush, he saw it. A full-grown, powerful tiger stalking him from afar. Its piercing yellow eyes were fixed on him as its massive body moved with the stealth and grace of a predator. David's heart was pounding in his chest as he froze there, knowing that one mistaken move would kill him. There were apes everywhere in the jungle, so technically speaking, this particular tiger could kill him with his eyes shut. And yet there was something strange with the behavior of the tiger, almost as if it wasn't charging him, nor did it growl by way of a warning. The tiger, in a weird way, seemed like it could be curious, approaching him slowly. Thoughts were racing in David's mind to make sense of it all. Was this tiger going to attack? Should he run? And then came a thought that truly struck him. Could it be Suri? Stay tuned to find out what happens next. Does the tiger remember her rescuer after all these years? David's heart started racing as the tiger slowly came forward, still not removing his eyes from David's face. It moved all around him, sniffing into the air, like trying to remember a long-forgotten memory. David froze in fear, for it was a wild animal. But as the tiger came closer, something amazing happened. Then the tiger lowered his head and rubbed his leg gently. Such a gesture of acknowledgement and love made David speechless. It was Suri. David couldn't believe his eyes as the small, helpless cub he had found was now a magnificent, powerful predator. Yet through everything that had passed, Suri still remembered him. She leaned against him, purring softly, this time softly, a little too soft for her look. She seemed like greeting an old friend. David hesitated for a moment before reaching out to stroke her massive head. The fur was warm beneath his fingers. He could hardly credit his eyes to what was happening. Tigers did not bond with people like this, yet there was Suri, acting like a loyal friend instead of the wild predator she had become. For what appeared to be an eternity, David and Suri stood in the clearing together. The tie between them was as strong as could ever be. It was one of those surreal moments, one that made no sense, and left David in awe of the ability of nature, not to mention the unbreakable connection he had with this incredible creature. But as the sun was setting, which colored the jungle with a touch of golden hue, David knew again that it was time for the goodbye. Suri was still a wild animal, and her place was in the jungle. She had come to him, if only for a brief moment, to remind him of the bond they shared. But now, time was for her to return to the life she was meant to lead. He backed away from Suri, carrying himself out of her path to clear her to leave. She stood for a moment, looking as if she didn't want to go, and then she very slowly turned and vanished into the trees. This time, however, David did not feel as heartbreaking in his chest as he had with the first sight of her leaving. He knew that she was going to the right place. That's the fabulous story of Suri the tiger cub, saved by a good Samaritan, and returned years later to express her gratitude. What do you think of their bond? Do you think animals can love or connect as much with humans in the wild? Please let us know what you think in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, then like, subscribe, and the notification bell for more such incredible stories like this. Thanks for watching, and we shall see you next time. Want to uncover the incredible story of a baby orca trapped in the rocks? Check out this video to discover what happened next.